We're going to go right into our next program on goods movement and eco-driving, and I understand our moderator has to catch a train to Washington, so I guess this one's going to stay on time. So our moderator is Dr. Allison Conway. She is an assistant professor of civil engineering at CCNY and the associate director of new initiatives at UTRC. She teaches and conducts research primarily in the areas of commercial freight policy and logistics, sustainable freight transportation, and multimodal interactions in the urban environment.
Thanks, Penny. In the interest of time, I will be introducing the speakers as they come up, but I will be giving an abbreviated introduction, so I encourage you to look at your program for the full description from each of our speakers. Looking forward to this session. We've got a great panel where we've got a researcher, who I'll introduce in just a second, a leading technology company, and an operator who has implemented those technologies. So we're getting kind of the full range of discussion on this topic. So first, I'd like to welcome back Dr. Kanak Borabun-Thompson, who is an associate research engineer at the College of Engineering Center for Environmental Research and Technology at the University of California at Riverside.
Thank you, Alison, and hello again. So for this session, I'm going to shift from light-duty vehicle space to heavy-duty vehicles and look at how we can reduce carbon footprint of goods movement through eco-driving programs. And this work was funded by the National Center for Sustainable Transportation, and it came from a white paper that we want to look at what have been done out there in terms of truck eco-driving programs, how do they work, and what are the potential fuel saving that people have been seeing, and what are the challenges and barriers, and also recommendations for future research. So to start off, this is a graph that shows operating costs of commercial trucking in the U.S. And if you look at the pink one, it's the fuel cost, and it's about a third of the total operating cost. So no wonder the trucking industry is interested in reducing fuel use and saving money for improving their bottom line. Now, on the other hand, in terms of greenhouse gas emission inventory of the U.S., medium and heavy-duty trucks that are mostly used for moving goods account for 22% of the total greenhouse gas from the transportation sector, or about 6% of the total greenhouse gas from all the sector in the U.S. So that's a substantial amount, and anything that we can do to drive that number down would be very helpful. Now, when we look at reasons for fuel waste in a typical freight truck, if you look at all the reasons that are listed on the chart, you can see that most of them are associated with how the drivers drive their vehicles. So a lot of trucking companies, as the previous speaker mentioned, have already invested in driver training. But in the past, their focus has been on safety. But of course, with the gas price and things like that, they also start looking at fuel efficiency as another metric for driver performance as well. Now, eco-driving, I took this definition from Oxford Dictionaries, the practice of driving in such a way as to minimize fuel consumption and emission of carbon dioxide. And then to kind of relate that to smart driving, I also add that when you do eco-driving, you shouldn't be compromising the safety of yourself and also other road users. Believe me, I have drive on California freeway with 65 miles per hour speed limit, and see a Prius driver that going at 45 miles per hour when other cars whip by, because that's the speed that the driver was getting probably the most fuel efficiency from his or her car. But that's not really safe. Now, eco-driving in a broader sense can also include something that you do before and after the trip, such as in case of freight, you do trip scheduling, route planning ahead of time, and also vehicle maintenance. And core principle of eco-driving are very similar across different vehicle types. But for trucks, there are some specific tips that the driver can do that are specific for trucks because of the unique characteristic of the truck engine. I just grabbed this infographic from an internet, and that show kind of 10 tips for a better eco-driving, specifically for trucks. So I'm not going to go through this slide in detail, but basically if you Google or try to find information about truck eco-driving, so there are a lot of information on the internet, so it's available out there. Now we're going to look at the effectiveness of truck eco-driving programs that have been studied in the past, and a limited number of studies has been conducted mostly in Europe and Asia, and now we start to see a lot more study happening in the US. When I say a limited number of studies, and that's because these are publicly available that can be accessible from someone like me, but I'm sure the trucking industry or companies probably doing their own study, but they keep the result to themselves and not really publishing that. Now, what we found from a scan of this study is that the reported fuel economy improvement vary greatly, as we have heard throughout the day. It ranged from 5% up to 40% for all the studies that were reviewed. But if we zero into specific study that involve a large amount of driver samples of greater than 300 drivers, then the range become narrow, just about 5 to 15%. And the result kind of vary because it depends on a lot of factors, such as number of truck driver samples, obviously, the baseline driving performance. If the truck drivers were already doing a good job, there's going to be less room for them to improve upon what they are doing right now. The method of the eco-driving intervention also play a role, whether you do like a driving simulator training or in-vehicle, in-cab training, it make a difference. And also the setting for the evaluation, whether it's again in the simulator environment or on the road, as well as the provision of incentive. So I summarize the studies, selected studies on this slide. It looks a little busy, but I just want to point out a few key important information. The first one is, as I mentioned, the range of fuel economy improvement go from 5% all the way to 40%. But if you look at the study highlight in red, which involved more than 300 drivers, the range become narrower, just 5% up to around 15%. Now, this study only has 46 drivers, but what's unique about this one is that they test the effect of providing incentive to the truck drivers. Remember, a lot of truck drivers are employed by a company, so when they eco-drive and save money, the money actually improve the bottom line of the company, and there's nothing that they get out of that, right? So the company should try to make sure that that saving kind of trickle down back to the driver in form of incentive. And for this study, with the provision of incentive, the fuel economy improvement roughly double from what it would have been achieved without the incentive. So that's a very important information to understand. The next few slides, we're going to look at what consists of what makes a successful truck eco-driving program. And the first and probably most important one is the driver education and training. After all, it's all about driver because they are the ones who are behind the wheel. So it's important to provide education. It could be in terms of a course, a webinar, a class, and also training, such as on-road, in-cab training, one-on-one coaching. The next element is vehicle maintenance and technology support. And this can be provided both from the government and the fleet themselves. For the government, it can be something as easy as providing free access to air pumps at rest areas, or more advanced, like try to accelerate fuel-saving technologies for trucks, such as aerodynamic retrofits and things like that. For fleet, fleet can also do a lot of things, such as streamlining the preventive maintenance, making sure that all the oil change and all the tires pressure are at the proper level, and also invest in the fuel-saving technologies so that the driver can have easier job in trying to reduce fuel use. And the last element, but not least, is the policy support. From the government point of view, the government can promote eco-driving through awareness campaigns, or even go as far as include it as part of the commercial driver licensing process. And also provide any sort of subsidies so that truck owners or fleets can try to retrofit their trucks with any advanced fuel saving technologies. And the government can also encourage or even mandate these technologies in future model years truck, such as the fuel economy and greenhouse gas standard for medium and heavy duty trucks. From the fleet side, the fleet can build a culture with truck drivers. It's all about a culture, and they can try to build that fuel efficiency culture, and then also include fuel efficiency as one of the metrics for driver performance review, and also again recognize or reward the driver with incentives. Now let's look at challenges and barriers for the drivers. Driving habits are just hard to break. Just ask Mr. Simpson. And again, without proper incentive or reinforcement, the impact of eco-driving may fade over time. We heard about 20% go down to 7% hypothetically, but we really don't have a solid number on that. For the industry, they also face several challenges. The first one is that it's an industry with high turnover rate for the drivers. So they may be reluctant because if they invest in any sort of training, and if the truck drivers leave the job, then they have to reinvest in the training of the new drivers. So that might hold them back. And also, truck companies, even though fuel costs are a big chunk of their operating costs, but there are also other costs too, insurance, maintenance, and other things, and they have to balance all the goals, including productivity, on-time performance, and also safety. So they have to kind of make sure that they balance everything. And again, get back to the issue of fuel prices. So for the diesel at $2 per gallon, it's make a harder case for fleet managers to invest in any sort of fuel-saving technologies, right? For the government, there are some challenges and barriers as well. So to incorporate it into driving licensing process will involve substantial institutional change, even change of regulation or laws, and that could be a lengthy process. And let's say to mandate such technology in new vehicle model year also involve working with truck manufacturers and stakeholders. And again, that could be challenging as well. And as always, funding is also limited. So there is not enough money in order to help fleet conduct eco-driving education or retrofit their trucks with eco-driving technologies. So I throw out a few research that haven't been looked at in detail. So for eco-driving, most of the time people talk about fuel saving and maybe greenhouse gas reduction. But for trucks, they are a big contributor of air pollutant, especially NOx and also particles. So eco-driving is likely to also reduce these air pollutant emissions as well. So there could be co-benefits that we have not paid attention to, and that could improve our case for the eco-driving of trucks. Safety-related implications, intuitively, all the driving techniques for eco-driving should also correlate well with improved safety, but I have not seen a dedicated study that quantified that relationship in detail. Now, on the other hand, is there any potential for driver distraction with all the technologies in the truck cab right now? They have radio, they have navigation, and now we want to add eco-driving feedback. Are they going to be overwhelmed and distract? And that could imply safety as well. So there are a lot more that can be done in terms of eco-driving techniques and technologies for trucks. The first thing is onboard instrument. As I mentioned, there are so many things going on in the truck cab already. So how can we integrate that in a seamless manner as shown in the graphic, or how we can customize the feedback to individual drivers based on their baseline driving performance. And also connected vehicles, as you may have heard, now we are into the era of connected vehicles where we have connectivity everywhere. Is truck eco-driving able to piggyback on that new connectivity and use the information that it received to improve further the effectiveness of the technology? This slide shows some examples of the ongoing research at our research center. The first one is truck eco-routing. This is not really the driving part, but as I mentioned, for trucks, especially for delivering goods, routing and scheduling can be done in a smarter and more eco-friendly way. And really, this is similar to navigation, but instead of calculating the typical shortest distance route, sometimes truck can pick another route that will save more fuel. And another one that we are looking at is to provide real-time speed advice to the truck drivers. So instead of stop and go, if we know what the traffic is doing ahead of us, then we can be more anticipating and adjust the speed according to traffic so that we don't have to do stop and go driving. And that in turn save fuel and reduce emission. So to summarize, truck eco-driving sounds like a win-win-win strategy for the driver, for the fleet, as well as the government. And a successful truck eco-driving program consists of 3 elements. We have to have driver education and training. We have to provide them with vehicle maintenance and technology support. And at a higher level, we also need to enact policy support so that everything can work in concert. Large-scale studies have shown that these kind of programs can improve fuel economy of trucks by about 5 to 15%. But more research can be done to look at a lot of things in order to better understand the impact of truck eco-driving programs and to further advance truck eco-driving technologies. Thank you. As I mentioned, this is part of the white paper from NCST, and I include the URL on the slide in case you would like to get a copy of it. And I also would like to acknowledge U.S. Department of Transportation for the funding and Shu Wei Ki, a graduate student who helped with the gathering information for the study. Thank you.
Okay, so if there's one question while we change over the presentation, anyone? Otherwise, we'll come back at the end. Okay, we'll come back at the end. So I'd like to introduce our second speaker, Mr. Edward McCarthy, who is Vice President of Operations and Customer Success at Vnomics. He joined Vnomics in 2008 as one of the founding members from the Center for Integrated Manufacturing Studies at Rochester Institute of Technology. Prior to that, he served as a military officer with more than 20 years of active duty in heavy equipment combat units with the United States Marine Corps.
Okay, thanks.
So quickly, I'm going to give you, I'm not an academic. So I come from a practical point of view, having introduced this in-cab coaching and fuel driving to both the Marine Corps and now to the commercial heavy truck industry. It was a great introduction I got. Why do we care, or why do you guys in this room care about the truck industry? They are way ahead of the rest of the world on this because fuel is their second largest cost. And yes, I would love to see fuel prices, only diesel, not you, Brian, but I would love to see fuel prices go up because that makes my ROI even better. But these industries understand saving fuel to them is is a bottom line savings, and that drives them every single day. Brian is one of my customers. I had him come along just to make sure that, you know, my hands are not disappearing real fast and I'm doing the sales thing, because he has actually implemented in his fleet up in upstate New York a fuel company called Turpinning, which has been growing very rapidly over the last couple of years, and is a great example of it. To give you some perspective of where we're coming from, I run a test every day. I put 500,000 miles on in-cab catching every single day with 15,000 trucks on the road and about 20 to 25,000 drivers logging in, so because some of them hot seat the trucks. So while I think there is much similarity, much that we've learned over the last couple of years actually doing it in a cab, and there are some similarities, there are some differences. So I will go quickly through my presentation, but if anybody is interested in what are the differences between like passenger and trucking, I think there are some. Two big things I want to highlight: gamification works, and we'll talk about that, and people feeling that it's fair works, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So obviously it counts for 25%. Our big study, which conducts 5 years, and I think my last look is we're at some like 76 million miles of collected data and drive time with this stuff. It may be higher than now. We are seeing about a 3 to 10% savings. Fleet-wide real savings, as our customers have talked about. That's the numbers that we're seeing. Why would that be a little lower than when you see on the research side? One, these trucking companies are good at this. These drivers are good at what they do. They really are. We target the same things that you talked about: idling, speeding, a technique called progressive shifting. What that really means is making sure you're in the appropriate gear for what you're hauling, and it's in the most fuel efficient gear for moving that cargo. And the last thing that we also target is on the automatic side, something called throttle control, which hasn't been talked about a lot today, but that's basically ensuring that that driver is not mashing down on that pedal and kind of defeating the purpose of the automatic transmission. You would think that they've got it down, but not yet. There is technology coming out, but you can actually defeat the purpose of the automatic transmission. This is what our device looks like. We use what we call gentle coaching. And on our larger product, which is a full telematics product, we also use visual displays to coach our drivers. We call it gentle coaching because I can tell you right now, they spend 11 hours in a cab all day long. And if I beat them to tell them when to shift every single time, not many of my systems would survive the first day. So we gentle coach. What that means is as they get outside of the bands that we consider important, that's when we tone them, and no other time, and then we start to slowly tighten it up as they get better to drive them in that sweet spot of where I need to be, both for, as we talked about, shifting, speeding, acceleration, that kind of stuff. Sits right up on the dash. We give them a score, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. Our approach, it's pretty basic. We precisely monitor each vehicle's fuel. And what does that mean? I connect in every single commercial truck that's sold in the United States now has a standardized network on board that I can read every single sensor that's on there. So I connect right in, and I use all of that data to include actual fuel flow rates to create a memory map of their engine. And then with some early machine learning techniques, we actually say this is where the driver is driving now under all of the conditions that are existing, how heavy the load is, weather conditions, road conditions. This is the ideal point where he should be at, either when it occurs with shifting, and we see how close they match. And that's what we look at. And that's also what we give to our customers so they understand exactly how fuel is being used. They understand which routes are tougher on them, which loads are tougher on them. So there's not only a fuel savings benefit for them, but they can actually identify how much truly a route costs and which drivers are using the techniques. Because we're going to talk about MTG, because MTG is a horrible way to judge a driver. And we'll talk a little more about that. Just as an aside, if anybody doesn't know this, the ECMs that are on board, just like the magic numbers they put on your cars, are absolutely horrible at estimating how much fuel you use. They use averages and stuff like that. They're way off. They always are done to the benefit of the little sticker that sits out in front. The best way to do this is actually looking at the fuel flow as the guy is going through his day. And that's how you get a good judge. These are the most inaccurate, the ECUs are most inaccurate. And that's always an eye-opener. Many of our customers actually select their trucks based on fuel. Now they select it based on the scoring that they get and the cost per mile based on the conditions they use it. That's how they select it now. And that's been an added benefit. So they're changing truck manufacturers based on their particular routes. This just kind of gives you some of the things that we look at. As I talked about non-distracting tones, originally I had this great idea that I was going to put up on a screen, I was going to put up a dollar sign and say, here's how much money you're saving if you're driving, and actually run a dollar sign up, because our customers were using incentives, like they were paying the drivers a little bit more if they drove fuel efficiently. It was a win-win for the company. They retained good drivers and that. I put those dollar signs up there, and what we found the guys were doing were riding down the road, making sure they were making that dollar sign go up, or the dollar sign went down if they didn't, and it was unsafe. So we had to go with a little bit less distracting in the thing. So we use a lot of toning, and then at the end, or when they stop for more than a minute, we put a score up. Gamification works. One thing that may not directly translate, 90% of the drivers that I have, guess what they are, male or female? Male, right? If I put a score up that says your driver's score today is 85, 90, I'm 3/4 of the way there. Because as Brian will attest, the drivers come back, what'd you get today? I got 98. And then if they put it up in that break room and there's a guy on top and a guy on the bottom, that's a lot of incentive right there. Not all the way. Once you monetize it, it makes it even better. But it's a win-win again. The other thing that was not mentioned a lot today is drivers that are driving eco-friendly are safe drivers, because they don't speed, they don't slam on the brake because that drops their score down, they don't accelerate fast because that drops their score down. And the other savings that you get that was not talked about today was the savings on that truck. People that overspeed those engines because they're mashing down on the throttles, or they're putting it in the wrong gear, or those kind of things, they're hurting those trucks. And they're making those trucks have less useful life. So when you guys are out there trying to monetize the savings on this, you need to think about those other things that you get when you do this. The companies, what do they gain out of it? One of the biggest problems in our industry is, Brian, you would got driver shortage right now. Can't get enough drivers, right? So I want to make sure I keep the drivers that I have. How do I keep the drivers I have? I identify the ones that are the best in a fair way that we all believe in, and I make sure I hang on to those by paying them. I identify the drivers that are costing me money because they're not driving eco-efficient or whatever. I train them. I have something that I can physically talk to them about because of the outputs, and I try to move them from C to A, get them up there to the top level drivers. And the ones that don't listen, okay, I can attrit those. Again, safety. Every one of the companies gets scored on their safety score, and if they have a bad driver, that hurts my rating, and it costs me more money because I have more reporting requirements and all kinds of things, or eventually I can lose my certification. So again, they are really incentive, and they're way ahead. Our special sauce, so to speak, is we actually have a patent on something we call potential MPG. And basically, because of the the fuel mapping that we do over the first couple of weeks that our system's on board the truck, we're kind of able to normalize out the things that the drivers don't control: terrain, environment, load, and vehicle. Again, MPG is a very unfair way of rating drivers, but the industry 5 years ago, 8 years ago, before they started being able to collect this data and use this data, that was all they had. But everybody can understand this basic thing. If I'm a driver riding on flat road with air in the back of my thing or feathers in the back of my truck, I'm going to get 7.8, 8.5 miles per gallon.
If I'm the driver in Pennsylvania hauling up on a big hill with bricks in the back, I'm going to get 5.5 gallons. Is that fair to compare me? Is that a good way for me to assess how much that load cost me? Why? What are the factors? No. And that's what the drivers like about it, and that's what that we can remove that and then score them on the things that really matter: shifting, idling, throttle control, and speeding. Again, we measure actual against potential. Our customers know where they're wasting fuel. It gives them targeting training for their drivers. That says it in a nutshell. You have 3 drivers. One guy here on the left's getting 7.2. Another one's getting 6.5, and poor Sue down there is getting 6.1. The olden days would say, Jeff's the best driver. That's the one I want to keep. Get rid of Sue. Now, if you have a way to normalize out those things that they can't control, you can see that actually the actual fuel use versus her potential, Sue's doing the best that she possibly can to get it right. And she's the driver that I want to keep, not Jeff. Actually, I want to keep both. So we then tell Jeff, here's why you're getting that extra half gallon there, because you're idling too much, you're not in the right throttle, and you can visually show them. And here's a great example. This is one of the reports that Brian uses every day and we use. Just quickly, this shows you how this kind of information is really powerful. What you're looking at is speed on the bottom, RPMs along the side, and guess what each one of those little speck lines are? Anybody guess? Those are shifts, right? So on the left-hand side, you can see that that guy is shifting. He's waiting too long. The shift points are happening way up above 1,500 meters, or 1,500 RPMs. It's way outside the band of where the most power is drawn for the fuel that is flowing through that engine. It's way above. Also, that's also hurting that engine and reducing its useful life. We coach them, start to guide them in. We can get them, and over on the right-hand side, you can see that's a coach driver. And oh, there's all kinds of nice little information. One tidbit, you know, this is the way we spec trucks. If you look off on the right-hand side, that guy's doing everything he can. If I'm running him on a road that requires him to run 65 miles an hour and his spectral thing is up still above 1,500, then I've spec'd that truck incorrectly because he's done everything he can. He's in that top gear. He can't shift to a next higher gear to lower it down. So that tells me I may have spec'd that truck, or I have the wrong truck for that particular type of load or that particular type of route. So there's a lot of information that can be packed out of this stuff that saves companies money, and that's why they look at it. And that's really important, because then that's where they get their other fuel inputs in the future. They buy based on the routes they take, and that's the kind of information that's out there and available to you. We do a set of fleet-wide dashboards. Again, the only place I was able to get the money thing was up in the corner wide here. That's an example of one of our customers now. We learned that if we could say, here's how much money you're actually saving up in the corner, it lets them re-up with us, which is, of course, what we want. But it also talks about CO2 tons saved. Not as big of incentive as saving money, but there's quite a few trucking companies out there, particularly in the food side industry and some of your green industries, that they want to demonstrate that they're doing this type of thing. So we have companies that actually put their numbers right on the side. This is an example of how much ROI you can actually gain. This was a 10% improvement. Brian, you can talk to it a little bit. About a quarter of your drivers saw a 10% drop initially. Now they're going to lead a quarter percent. This is just a small fleet. This is of 76 trucks. There's a lot of trucks for a fuel call. But even with 76 trucks, what's your average miles that you're running a year right now?
4.5.
Yeah. They're saving just in 76, 843 tons. You can extrapolate that over 15,000, and then you could extrapolate it over the entire market, which is about 300,000 trucks on the Class 8 variety. So this gives you some idea of the impact this can have, and this is what's actually being done out in the industry now. Brian, do you have anything else you want to add or talk a little bit briefly about some of the things that you've done to kind of get the drivers buy-in and talk a little bit about the driver buy-in?
Yep. Thank you. As Ed was saying, that I'm in the operations for Terpening Trucking up in upstate New York. We're considered a small to medium class trucking company, 100 plus drivers, 76 trucks on the road currently. We've had a tremendous opportunity since 2010. We've had double-digit business growth, which is daunting for anybody that's trying to recruit drivers, buy equipment, train everyone, get them out on the road to be safe, but also these products the Vonomics Corporation provides the coaching components to make them a better driver for fuel efficiencies, to increase your bottom line at the end of the day. The capital savings from that, you in turn put toward your other business growth, whether it be safety items. My forte is safety, but operations as well, to try to reduce the expenses of the company. But drivers really do want to be professional in their what they're doing every day, getting out there in the public, because they don't want the bad press from either their driving behaviors, whether it be turning improperly or just, as they used to call it, cowboying the truck, wear and tear. The Vonomics product and products that we've been talking about today will reduce wear and tear on the vehicles, whether it be a small package handling company all the way up to ourselves, where we're hauling 107,000 pounds on our trucks in upstate New York. And it's the heaviest you can do in New York State. We range anywhere from 50,000 pounds to 107,000 pounds on our payloads. And the drivers have a tremendous responsibility. They're being monitored by DOT records. The coaching tools in the truck are not invasive in their environment. They're there anywhere from 10 to 14 hours a day. The tonings that Ed was referring to do actually work very effectively, because you're not invading their space other than when they start seeing a bad behavior develop, or they just unknowingly shifted a truck at a higher RPM. The current tractor trailers out there, their peak torque is around 1,200 RPM, which is in some cases idling in some regards. And the manufacturers are working toward reducing fuel costs for themselves, for the trucking companies to transport across the country and other countries. Those things, as Ed was referring to, are being built, and they are ahead of a lot of other industries in that regard, because they're being forced by the EPA, all those other factors playing a part of it, to reduce the carbon footprint. And from my perspective, in a small company in upstate New York, in regards to larger fleets, 3,000 or 4,000 drivers to tens of thousands of drivers, those numbers are huge, as you already know. The purpose of this today is to bring the awareness that we have to address these issues with the carbon footprint. And my take from my company, just one of many, is to be corporate responsible to the environment, but also to driver safety, to public safety, because us as a company can't afford, one, the bad PR from bad behaviors. You're not in business long by doing that if you're not responsible corporately toward the public, so they can be aware that you are a friendly company to work with, you are cooperative with the authorities, the DOT, and all the states that we operate. Makes their job easier in sending out the proper message across the board that it's not hard to take in, hard to get a buy-in. You have to be educating your drivers, to encourage your drivers, and to later on possibly enforce it if you do see some concerns coming up. They truly do want to get up every day, provide for their families, but also make sure that their company's successful. We spend anywhere from $7,000 to $14,000 in driver recruitment and retention. It's not something you just want to throw out the window because you see him not getting with the program right away. We want to make sure they are enabled and understand so they can move forward in their careers, because they truly, at the end of the day, want to do a fabulous job for themselves and the company, because they have to make an income. But I'm encouraged with everything I've heard today. It's my first type of event, and like the conversations going on here today just reinforce what we try to do in our corporate side of trying to be responsible to everyone around us, because you're in the public eye every day. And thank you.
Just to quickly summarize, what do I think are the differences and the same for some of the areas that you guys are talking, particularly on the passenger side? What's the same? What's important? The same things that we look at in the trucking industry: speeding, idling, fast braking, fast acceleration, being in the right gear, throttle control mostly now because almost everybody runs automatic cars. Those are the same. They're as important. Gamification works. The incentives may be a little bit different because there's large incentives for companies like them because they put 100,000, 150,000 miles a year. So the gamification and incentives may be a little bit different because 2% doesn't sound like a lot if I only drive, so many miles a day. That may not be like, so the ROI there's got to be a little different on that side. It's a lot when it comes to these companies, as you can see. It's a huge amount of money. Our largest company that we're on right now has 8,800 tractors. They save about 3% only because they have all kinds of auto shutoff, idle shutoffs. They limit RPM, they limit the speeds which they can operate, but they still get 3%. What is 3% for that company? About $42 million a year. When you're a company that's operating on margins around the 92 to 94, operating margin 92, 94, you're not making a whole lot of money. That's a huge amount of money for them. And then other things that we talked about today, the wear and tear on the vehicles, the safety and the legal fees and everything else, all of those are things I don't think we thought about today that you can capture that can have translation. I mean, we talked a little bit about insurance rates and stuff coming down. That's important. That's probably, like I said, is important on both sides. That's all I have. Anybody have questions? Yeah, sure.
Given what you measure, why would this not be a good idea to be selling to the railroads?
We just haven't gotten there yet. We're only a couple of years old, and we had, when the prices were really growing at 300% and 400%, and we just haven't gotten there. There's a lot of applications in and outside of this particular mode of transportation. This was just the easiest for us to start with first because we got the biggest impact.
Are there any particular measurement problems of these difficulties?
No, in fact, actually, we've been on some alternative fuels already. We have not been on electric, but we've been on some of the alternative fuels, natural gas, and some of the other trucks. Because a lot of the trucking industries are out looking for alternatives there again to just diesel, particularly when the prices are a lot higher a year or two ago. So there's a lot of application here, we think, across. The early machine learning techniques that we use to memory map the fuel flow in the engines, one of the asides of doing that is, we were talking about a little today, I call it, because I'm a Marine, so I got to keep things simple, stupid. I call it, one's not like the other, from the old Sesame Street TV show that my kids watched. We do the same thing with trucks. We look at them and we get these maps going. We look at the routes that they're following, and it's a very early indicator when engines are not performing well or drivers are not performing well. And we check these maps, and we can tell you what routes, we can tell companies what trucks, what specs, and what routes they should be running where they make the most money because they save on fuel. And again, there's you start to get a reinforcing effect. So it's not just straight, how much fuel do I say on a particular truck? It's that I make good decisions going forward in a number of different ways, truck selection, or also it is with the ability to do those kind of mapping, you can also identify how much savings you get from other fuel saving devices, because you have a baseline now that takes out all of the road conditions, the hills, the weight, and everything else. So if I want to know how much, for example, truck skirts, the little skirts you see across the, how much impact that really has, I've got a good way to measure that very quickly because I've taken out all of the stuff that doesn't depend. So there's a lot of other devices you can use it for. Any other questions?
Have you
Yes, we have. Actually, we were on a couple of school buses, and there's an interesting dynamic there that anybody who's a parent, I'm a knucklehead. I had 6 kids. I've got the last 2 teenagers in the house. I'd like one of these boxes on my car when my teenagers are driving every day, and that's something to think about because school buses are great. They don't drive a huge amount of miles, but they shift a lot. So to be in the wrong gear costs them a lot. So we see about a mile per gallon savings with fuel buses. But again, they only drive maybe 10 to 12,000 miles in the fleets that we're on. But what's really nice is because we have a tracking devices on this, where we see the real benefit is we've got all these helicopter parents out there now, right? What we do, we have an automated way of sending a parent an email or a notice or a text on their thing that says, the school bus is 1 minute from your house. And so now it's time to go out. Or the school bus is running a bit late. So don't, and that's actually the big seller because all these crazy people want to make sure that their kids are in a bubble wrap.
It's a moment.
I know.
We'll take one last question. and
Yeah,
then-
I just wondered if Brian could comment on posting them in the locker room and the incentives, how that's received with the drivers.
It's actually, what it had talked about and what you brought up, the drivers naturally, any human being is naturally competitive, whether they want to admit it or not. And posting it, some fear, well, if you put up my bad score, I'm going to feel like I'm not doing as well. Well, that's the object of it, is you can improve it. We've proven with worst case driver, just not paying attention to shifting scores. Over time, that audible tone, they don't want to hear it, they will improve, whether they like it or not. After a 12-month period, they realize, hey, I don't hear the tones anymore. Well, your shift score indicates that you went from a 43 to a 98% because you unconsciously have started shifting like you should. And as I said, educating them, enabling them with those tools really is the benefit for the trucking company and the general public because those guys are going to start focusing on other things being safe. And posting it in the break rooms, it really does develop that environment where they want to be competitive with it and they enjoy it. You think there'd be controversy there, but that's extremely rare. They really want to, as I said, they want to go out and do the best job they can every day. And if the company management is serious about it, they will naturally take it serious as well.
And it's funny, we see with the gentle coaching approach, right? If a guy drives the whole day and doesn't hear the tone, after, they're like, wow, I didn't hear it at all. I think the thing's, no, look, you got a 98.9. We're not going to tone you.
Yeah.
That's things to think about because if we're going to try to do some in-cab coaching on the people side, you need to think of better ways of coaching them so it's not an irritant. Because I can tell you if it's an irritant, it gets disconnected. And I'm telling from real life, there's a product out now, a safety product, where if a driver switches lanes too fast, a tone goes off every time he switches lanes. And there's times when he has to, and the tone goes off. Our particular system monitors whether or not the system is fully operational. And wonder, 85% of the speakers that are broken on the vehicle are the ones that are on the driver's side. And only 15% break on the passenger side. That's just, everybody I'm sure is shocked by that. But you can imagine how many of those have been disconnected. And that's something you need to think about is in your interface. How do you do it in a gentle way and incent them? Again, I'm not saying I would do it with my teenagers. I post their scores up on the wall in the house saying, here's who's getting, but there's other ways. If you can incent them where they get some sort of, we're looking at now through gamification, looking at maybe using like discounts at truck stops or things like that we can generate immediately in cab that they can get if they drive well. There's some other techniques. Thank you.
Thank you.